G'day and welcome back to the channel. I told you I'll be doing regular updates. This is another one. I made some notes. Here they are. Excuse me for a moment. So well prepared. Yeah, now it's good to see videos popping up on YouTube with the remote ID in the title and talking about this. It's been some excellent videos, absolutely excellent videos. I've been blown away by the way some people have spoken from the heart and brought up some really good points. I think you guys should have already seen them because you should be searching every day for remote ID, watching those videos all the way through, leaving a like and a comment so it gets into the algorithm and they start getting pushed out. Now some of them are getting, quite good views. There are even some big names have made videos. I think I saw Ken Dobo do a video. I haven't watched it, so maybe he's for, maybe he's against, I don't know. But it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter because it's all working to show the algorithm that this is a topic that's trending, people are interested, people are watching, and that's what we want. I don't care if people say remote ID is the best thing and you should support the FAA. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's still going to push us up in the algorithm. So wonderful work. Now, we're not going to get remote ID thrown out. We know that. It's a rule. It's already been passed. You can't back these things off with a blink of an eye. What we can hope to do, however, is change the way it's implemented. Now, the politicians and the FAA believe that remote ID is going to stop bad actors from doing bad things, hold them accountable. I think if you watch the videos that have been posted, most of us realize it's just not going to work that way. That's not how it's actually going to work. All it's going to do is penalize the innocent, us, for the crimes of the guilty, the very few people who have used drones inappropriately. So that's not how a just regulatory system works, but we've got to deal with the reality of the situation. So what I'm suggesting is that we need to be able to come up with a solution that we can present to the FAA that will enable us to continue pretty much unaltered, because we are not the problem. We are not the problem. So why should we be burdened with a solution that is only going to penalize us but not solve that problem? Now, the way I look at it, we've had a few good ideas. I put the one about, which has been already floated by a number of other organizations, lifting the registration and remote ID threshold to 1 kilogram. Now, that may not fly. There doesn't seem to be much interest. We had a letter writing campaign to the senators and it's turned into virtually nothing. The reauthorization bill makes no mention of it. The AMA said they were going to support it. They dropped all support for it. Flight Test were going to promote it. They put it on their second channel, 17,000 views. So it hasn't really been pushed hard by anybody. So it hasn't got much traction. But that's one we can put in our toolbox. Now, other people brought up some interesting things in their videos. One was a suggestion that remote ID should only apply to drones with camera gimbals, because it's the camera drones that are the problem. Now, I'm not going to throw camera drones under a bus. We are all part of one community. We must all pull together. We must be unified in this. To be honest, there are a hell of a lot more camera drone flyers than there are freestyle flyers involved in this thing. So we need to make sure that everybody is represented. One thing I would say to the camera drone owners is that you've got remote ID whether you want it or not, whether it's required under regulation or not. As we know, DJI drones have always broadcast the operator's position, the drone position, all that remote ID stuff. They broadcast it in the video stream so that anyone with a DJI aeroscope ground unit can do exactly what remote ID does and more. So you've always had remote ID ever since you bought your drone. So this is nothing new for you. The concerning thing is that if you buy a sub 250 gram DJI drone like the Mini, DJI are forcing remote ID on you. You've got it anyway. And I queried DJI on this and said, why are you forcing people to have remote ID active when there's no legal requirement for them to do so? And their response was, yes, but those sub 250 grams could be used for Part 107 and they have to have remote ID for that. My response was, then why don't you make a DJI Mini Professional, which has remote ID, and a DJI Mini Recreational that doesn't? And I've heard nothing more. I don't think it's going to happen. So DJI, like they've put geofencing in, they've put in remote ID because they think it's going to buy them favour with the regulator. I'm looking at how the federal government has basically dumped on DJI and want to ban them. I don't think it's doing them any good. But if you've got a DJI drone, you are already heavily using remote ID, whether you realise it or not, whether you like it or not. So we're not going to throw DJI users under a bus, but there's nothing we can do to protect you because you're already there. DJI has forced it on you, so we can't change that. We can hopefully change the way the rule is implemented for everybody else. So let's look at the options we have. As I say, moving the threshold from 250 grams to 1 kg is an option. Requiring it only on camera or drones that have a gimbal is another option, or drones that have GPS. drones in the model that have GPS. That's another option, because these are the drones that are easy to fly. They're the ones that are more likely to be used by bad actors. I'm not saying that DJI or camera drone or GPS operated craft are operated by bad actors. I'm saying if a bad actor wants to do something bad, that's probably the kind of drone they're going to use. They're certainly not going to use a foam model of a Piper Cub, a 250-gram foam model of a Piper Cub, or a P-51 Mustang, or an RC helicopter. They're not going to use those things, or an RC glider, or especially like a discus launch glider, which has no power source except no means of motive force except the guy that throws it. To require those things to have remote ID is where the problem really lies. I think you'll agree. In freestyle, again, no one's going to use a freestyle quad to do a bad thing. It just doesn't have the range, the endurance. It's not the right tool for the job. So we need to come up with a way of differentiating what, in some cases, may benefit from remote ID and that which has no benefit at all to the security or safety of the nation by having remote ID thrust upon it. But I've come up with what I think is another fairly reasonable option. Now, in manned aviation, it's quite normal to have areas or zones where you have to do things. For example, if you're flying in Class G airspace, you don't really have to do very much. But if you go into Class C or D or E airspace, most countries you have to have ADSB. You are required by law to have ADSB so that you can be tracked and the air traffic can be organised and so forth. But in Class G, you don't need it. So the default is no ADSB. But if you want to go into these other classes of airspace, ADSB becomes mandatory. There are other situations where the default is no radios required in Class G airspace. But if you want to go into the other classes of airspace or what's called a mandatory broadcast zone, you have a radio and you have to make regular calls. But the default in Class G is no radio, no ADSB. So why don't we apply this to the remote ID setup? Why don't we, at the moment, FAA reckons they're going to be allocating FRIAs, areas where you don't need remote ID. Well, let's invert that. Let's turn that on its backside and say, why don't you just declare the entire country a FRIA? So the default is you don't need remote ID. And then those sites where you don't want bad actors behaving badly, doing nefarious things, why don't you make them remote ID mandatory zones, just like you have broadcast mandatory zones and ADSB mandatory zones. Well, so around government buildings, perhaps highly populated areas, things of nuclear power plants, make those remote ID mandatory areas where you cannot fly near them without remote ID. So that little Johnny in the park, with his little drone, he doesn't need to have remote IDs. There's no risk to anybody there. And people who are flying on their own property, people who are flying in the countryside miles from anywhere or any piece of infrastructure or assets, they don't need remote ID because there's no point in them having it. So we must make sure that the remote ID is used where it may be of some benefit from a security and safety aspect, but not where there's no benefit at all. Just use the manned aviation model where the default is you don't need a radio, you don't need ADSB. But in those areas where it can serve as a safety or security component of the airspace management, you do need it. Let's do it that way. Why can't we do it that way? We should go to the FAA and say, right, we don't like this idea of having to apply for every individual place we can fly without remote ID. Why don't you guys just nominate where we do need it and just those areas where it would be of benefit? That to me sounds like a perfect solution to this whole damn problem, which means that they're probably not going to listen. But we have to come up with ideas, and that's one that I had the other day while I was mulling this all over. Again, this other thing I want to talk about is the license plate analogy. I've come up with a much better one than license plate. Now, the FAA says that the remote ID system is like a license plate for your drone. Well, I would disagree. It is more like an ankle bracelet. You know the GPS ankle bracelets that people who are on house arrest or whatever, where the police need to track them, they've been convicted of a serious crime, not serious enough to put them in prison, but it means they've got home detention. So the police need to know that they're in where they're supposed to be. That's what we've got with our drones. We've got GPS ankle bracelets where we have remote ID. Now, the problem there is that GPS ankle bracelets are only fitted after you have been accused of or found guilty of a crime. If you're innocent, you don't have an ankle bracelet. We don't see people in the streets with ankle bracelets, just on the mere chance that they may commit a crime, and then we'd know where they were. But that's what they're saying about our drones. We want you all to have ankle bracelets on your drones in case you do something bad. And that's a threat to the basic tenet of justice, the basic thing where you are presumed to be innocent at all times until you're proven guilty. Well, remote ID presumes that we're all bad actors trying to do nefarious things until we can prove otherwise. And that is not the way justice works. It's an unjust imposition on the hobby. And so if the FAA says it's just a license plate, we say, no, it's an ankle bracelet put on innocent people. And would you, as a member of a citizen of the country, would you accept the government telling you to fit an ankle bracelet just in case you committed a crime? They wanted to know where you were at that time. You wouldn't. Nobody would. So why should we accept the presumption of guilt that goes with remote ID on our craft, especially in areas where there is no risk to the public. There's no risk to the security of the nation. I think that should be a thrust of our argument as well. And finally, in today's update video, I wanted to share this with you. Thank you, Alan Yu, Canadian vlogger who flies drones as well. And he posted a link to this, or he posted this article, and I thought, my goodness, that's so good. We know the reason that we're being effectively cleared from the airspace, the 0 to 400 foot airspace, is because there are commercial interests, very powerful commercial interests that want this airspace all to themselves. That includes people like Amazon and Google who want supposedly to do drone deliveries, and it includes companies that want to perform urban air taxis, vertical takeoff air taxis, flying taxis that they can move people around a city. Well, this article here is brilliant. It points out the folly of this whole concept, how strong winds in an urban environment would make these craft a death trap because they simply could not cope with the turbulence that such winds produce. And there are many cities around the world where the wind is more common than not. And even in relatively calm areas, there are going to be times when winds get up. And if you're unfortunate enough to be in one of these air taxis, when the wind gets up, what are you going to do? Well, you're probably going to form a thin layer on the ground below and people will die. So it severely reduces the application of these urban air taxis. And I've been saying for many, many years, these urban air taxis are never going to fly commercially. Yeah, you can make them fly, you can make a concept vehicle, you can make it fly, but we do not have the battery technology to make them economically viable. And no one's going to run them as a charity. They will not be run as a charity. So the companies that build them will want to make a profit, and they can't. So I have a video coming for the people who are investing in these air taxis. I'm going to go through and line by line explain how these things can never make money as they are currently designed and built because the battery technology isn't there. And as we know, new battery technology only comes along about once every 30 years. Lithium-ion batteries have been a thing for about 10 years. So we've still got 15 to 20 years to go until the battery technology that enables these things to be viable arrives. And I don't think any investor is going to want to wait 15 to 20 years to get a return on the millions of dollars they're pouring into these craft. So yeah, we are being pushed out of the airspace for no really valid reason because the corporates are not going to be running these air taxi services anytime soon. Anyway, that's my update for today. I thank everybody who is making the videos and watching the videos, commenting and liking on those videos. And I also thank everybody who supports me through Patreon membership of the channel. Brilliant. And gives me the freedoms that I can do this stuff, hopefully protect and support the hobby forever and ever until I die. And in the meantime, thank you. I will get back. I've got a lot of work to do. Now, we've got the news cycle I was talking about. We've had the end of the Titan submersible one, but now we've got the Russian situation with the Putin versus the other guy. So hopefully that will have died down by the end of the week and we can launch our thing. If it hasn't died down, if the news cycle is still active with something else, then we'll just push that out a few days until we get that essential lull in the news when all the media are going, what are we going to write about now? What are we going to do stories on now? That's the moment we pounce with our story, and that's when we capture their attention. And they go and look on YouTube and look at all those, hopefully hundreds or thousands of videos. There's only tens of videos at the moment. So if you haven't made yours, what's stopping you? Go for it now. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Overregulation is like a tumor. It's killing our hobby. It must be terminated. Now!